Hello everyone, once again thanks for checking out my channel today. In the last tutorial I was showing you how to get a Python backend to serve JavaScript built from the Angular CLI, and we left off in that video with we were able to get the JS files to serve from the Flask backend, but we were having to copy the files manually after the build process. So in this video I'm going to walk you through a script that I've written that automatically builds the compiles and builds the JS files um, periodically, and actually watches for changes in the development code. And also there's a bit of code in there that is going to check the dist folder where our Angular gets built out to, and it's going to copy the HTML and JavaScript files into our static and templates folders respectively. So without further ado, first of all, I'm going to go to the web app and I'm going to prove this is working. So this is the state it's currently in. So we have welcome to Flask Angular web app, or app at the top, and then we have we just have this two-way data binding little input here with a div or a p tag that is showing what we type in. So that's all fine and that's all working. Let's see if we can make a change in the development code here and actually see that reflected on the front end without having to copy any files or folders manually across. So I'm just going to write this is a test for here. I'm going to save that, and the script running over here has built these new files out and they should have been copied across. So let's go and see if we actually see that on the front end. So there we are. We have this is a test and this is coming up. So all I've done, to recap, was I've changed the development Angular files, yet they've actually been built automatically and copied over to our Flask web server folders, and the updated files are then being served from our Flask web server. So this means that we don't have to have a development server, HTML server serving the JS, and then a separate one actually doing the back-end code. So I'm just going to walk through this build dev Python script that I've written to do this, just to give you a bit of explanation on how this is happening. So I've made use of OS subprocess time. I've just imported to do it like a sleep function. So all it's doing is it's telling this this copy code to actually run once every 10 seconds. You could set that to whatever you want. At the top, I'm getting the current directory of this file. Now this file is actually in the same directory as our Python web app, so this main Flask app. And what it does is it gets the current working directory, which will be set to whatever the file path is, and that gives us a bit of context of where we are. Directories is going to be equal to the list of directories and files that's in this folder. And what I have here, I have a constant set to static templates and venv, which is the ones we want to ignore. So pretty much what I'm saying is whatever folder is not in this, it doesn't have these titles, then this is going to be our Angular folder. So this means we can get the folder name dynamically without having to type in or change the directory name every time we create a new project. So what I then do is for directory in directories, I just loop through, as I said, and I find the one that's not in here. So I say if it doesn't contain a dot, like some of these files contain .py or whatever else, there might be other files in there, ignore them. And also if it's not in this, then that's the one we want. So we want the one without the dots and that isn't in this array up here or list. And then we set our Angular project path to this path here. And then what we have is our dist path, is we use os.path.join to join dist to the end of Angular project path. So that's going to be dist, and then like in the last video, we can see that this also has another subfolder with the same title as our main Angular root folder. So that's why I have Angular project path and then dist and then directory again, because directory was picked up as Angular Flask back at this stage here. So moving on, we have Flask static path. So this is the current directory with static, so that's going to be Angular Flask / static, and then we have one for templates as well. So this is going to let Python know where to copy the relevant JS and HTML files later on. Now I'm using the subprocess library here to call a bash function. So I'm cding into the Angular project path, because if we run any of the ng commands from a directory other than that, we're just going to get an error. It's not going to work. So I'm saying cd into the Angular path and then run this ng build. So what ng build does is it takes the source folder and maybe more, and my knowledge of Angular isn't 100%, but this is where our development files live in here, and what it's going to do is it's going to watch for changes in those files with this watch flag here. So it's ~watch, and that's going to check, and anytime a change is made to the code and saved, it's going to rebuild into our dist folder. And then I have this base href and I have it as static. So the reason I have that is once Angular builds out a index.html file, we will have this href here. So we want this to be set as static. So the final one that gets built out, let me see, that should be in templates. You can see here we have href static. Now this is just giving the directory, this just allows the directory to match up. If we don't do that, we just get a load of 404 files not found when we're actually on the front end. So that's why we add in that flag. This is just a simple boolean just to make sure that this while it runs for the entire duration of the script running, and then this is controlled also by a 10-second delay. Usually it's not good practice to have these like infinite loops, but just for the purpose of this, we want this running the whole time while we're developing, so it's just a simple script. So moving on from there, we have files os.list dist path. Now what this is going to do is it's going to list the files inside this Angular Flask folder. We initiate a static file string and an HTML file string, and then for each file that it finds in Angular Flask folder, i.e. the ones that have been built out from the Angular build process, it's going to spit those files out into this Angular Flask folder. And if there's js.map or ICO, which is an icon file, we're going to append file plus space to that string, and I'll explain why later. So we're also going to do the same thing if HTML files are built out. So for example, if we're changing the HTML file, it's going to spit out a new index HTML file. If we're changing the JavaScript, it's going to spit out a JavaScript file. There might be cases where you're not necessarily always going to be changing one HTML file and one JS file. So this checks each one, and down here we will do if the length of static files is greater than 0, i.e. did it find a file, then we're going to do this subprocess.call, and we're going to cd into the dist path, and then we're going to move this concatenated string of all the files that are found in dist, and we're going to copy them to the Flask static path, which is down here. And then we have the same check, but for the HTML files. And we're going to do exactly the same thing, only we're going to copy it to the Flask templates path. Now remember, we set the templates path up at the top down here, so it's the current directory /static and /templates. This shell equals true flag for the subprocess.call. This is like realistically shouldn't be using this in any environment where, say, you have a web server and you have an API that has a subprocess.call. That would be bad practice, because this pretty much opens up our entire underlying Linux bash whatever shell to the user. But for the purposes of this script, this is just a development script, so we don't really worry about that too much. So this is just all wrapped in a try catch, just in case anything goes wrong. And that's about it. So that will allow you to work away in your development, changing your Angular source files, and just continue to test on the front end without having to start up a separate Angular server without having to copy files manually. I hope this has helped. If you found this video useful, I'd appreciate if you liked the channel and subscribed, and I hope to do more tutorials on this sort of stuff in the future. But thanks for listening.